All right, welcome to another episode of the Hyperformance podcast. I'm here with returning highly esteemed guest, friend of the show, Sean Noriega, also Jacob, my co-host. But Sean, how are you doing?
I'm great, sir. I'm overwhelmed with excitement for Jacob here as he's creeping up on his first, 120 kilo deadlift?
200 kilo deadlift. No, that's honestly where we were starting out at a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I had my opener set at 140 on my first comp.
It's all good, man. You can still run. I can't, so it's fine. I remember almost 2 years ago at this point, I was at the gym when I was living in Miami, and they had a bunch of turf, and everyone was jumping around. I did like one jump, and I felt a pull in my Achilles. I'm like, shutting it down. We're not doing this anymore.
Wait, was that the virus photo shoot?
No, that was. I had enough elasticity still in my connective tissue back then. But
yeah, because there's a shot of you from that virus campaign. You look like you're about 5 feet off the fucking ground, about to fucking drop the hammer through the hoop. And I was like, geez, fuck, they revved him up for that one. But no, Jacob, and I'm sure you've seen this, Sean, when you're dealing with someone who's starting out on their lifting journey, Jacob can dunk a basketball. For sure, there's some force that he can put in the ground. But when people just don't know how hard they can try on a deadlift, but that they just need the experiences to work it out. So he had his first full grind at the last push-pull run, and he put 20 kilos on his deadlift max. So the 200 is just a matter of him waking up one day and being tired about not being a 200 kilo deadlifter.
Yeah.
It's an emotional thing.
Could have developed that muscle, I think, yeah.
Sorry, I had to bust your balls there, Jacob. But yeah, it's all good fun.
Okay. it needs to happen. So last time you were on the show, I think you were sort of just coming off the back of a nationals performance. It was the hamstring adductor injury. So there's been, I think so, off the top of my head, because I was trying to place it, and from memory, I remember bringing up, it didn't feel like it was that long after Johnny Candido's infamous profile picture swap.
Yep. Okay, then yeah, it was that one. That was 2021 then.
No, I feel like I had you on later than that. But yeah, it feels like about then, because again, federation changes, the landscape of powerlifting has sort of completely changed. With that being said, though, we did have a little bit of a break in the momentum of the show, so we probably have some new listeners. So can you give us the Cliff Notes intro, but then we'll sort of try to pick up where we left off, because I've got a whole line of questioning around the current state of powerlifting.
Just give you a rundown of who I am, I guess.
A little bit. Who's Hamstring Pappy?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Sean Noriega. I've been competing and coaching in powerlifting since 2014, so about 10 years. Throughout this course of time, I've had an awesome opportunity to compete at the world level, coach at the world level in the 83 kilo weight class. And now, as of 2020, I had started a coaching team. So while I had been coaching since 2014, when the COVID year hit, I was like, well, I need to do something. I need to make the most of my time right now. And starting a team was always something I wanted to do. At this point, I now have 4 coaches along with me on the coaching staff. And my goal has just been to be the best athlete I can, best coach I can, and put out a lot of educational content, which is why in the past year, myself and a couple colleague, fellow coaches of mine started a platform called Powerlifting Now, which is just your library for educational content as a lifter or a coach. That's my little professional summary there.
And all we need for the cherry on top, tell us your maxes. Because when I tell people your bench press, sometimes I just end up in conversations about this guy, Sean Noriega. Have you heard about this guy? Because I go to a gym and there's a growing powerlifting community, but a lot of those people, what we were seeing in 2016 in Killeen, that'd be like the equivalent of them going back and watching old sort of West Side versus the World shit. Give us those SBD maxes.
Yep. So best squat is 300 kilos, although in a couple weeks, I think that's finally going to change. Best deadlift is 340 kilos. Jesus. And then best bench press is, so technically it's 227.5 kilos, but now with the whole bench depth rule, it's sitting at about 207, 210 kilos. So
with a disgusting training max of 240. Just
that
one of the grossest things I've ever seen in my life.
So I was actually talking with someone about that the other day. It's like the Rogue fat pad, when you just absolutely abuse it and wear it down, it just gets the nicest divot right where your shoulders go. So since it's a cushiony bench, since it's grippy, and then you have that deficit, it's like you're on a decline. You know, my range of motion is already short enough, and then when you had that little 2 inches of a divot from everyone in the gym wanting to use that pad, it was great. It was a good time.
Yeah, because they've got a Donnie Thompson fat pad at the gym I train at. And even I couldn't believe it, because I heard that this was a topic that powerlifters would commonly bring up. And I knew you always, it was a source of stress for you, like what bench you were even going to be competing on. Because even amongst the thinner ones, like there's differences between like a Rogue and a Lico, as far as I understand it. Drug tested competitions, are any of them ever going to give you a fat pad? Do untested guys get a fat pad?
No. A lot of untested meets usually use nowadays Ghost equipment, because Alex Uslar, who owns Ghost Gym and used to have a partnership with the actual equipment company, they host a lot of the higher level untested meets now. But I would say honestly, at a local level, you might see it in the US. Like I know some gyms in the Northeast that just use them for their meets. But what's interesting is the Rogue, the UK Arnold actually uses a Rogue rack. So they were using the fat pad a couple of years back, but Rogue, I think, just revamped the pad and made it more like the kind of like the new Texas Strength System pad, which you may or may not know what that is like, but it's thinner, but it's grippy. It has a good cushion to it. I think
why are they hassling me about my fucking deadlift socks when I do a comp? And then I thought, just with the nature of drug tested powerlifting, it seems like they're really into this concept of like a gold standard. They hammer people about depth. They give long press calls on bench press. I would have thought that they'd be like, no, like this is what a fucking bench press pad is. Like they specify like the millimeters you can have your belt. And like, what are your thoughts on that? Does it seem illogical to you, or does it make sense to you?
No, I mean, I would agree. I think now we're finally starting to see some standardization. Because, like, to give you an example, I mean, there have been times where like national level meets, or regional level meets, or like Commonwealth, like any of these like bigger meets where you would think, oh, we're going to have some sort of standard. There's no uniformity in what a rack was being used. There was no uniformity of like what the carpet even was. Like that's a big thing for something like a bench press, is like they would use something that was really slippery. It basically feels like you're just on a slick floor. But I think now with like Sheffield and just like the growth and money that's going into it, having this third party like SBD listening to the high level lifters of what they want, I think we're going to finally see this very standardized set of equipment. Like Alico, for example, has just come out with like a new bench pad that is like they're trying to revamp what all the complaints were about the old one, and like
no upholstery. That's a huge step forward.
Yeah, no, new upholstery. And then like this past Sheffield, it was like the first time that like an IPF meet actually used like a carpet for the platform instead of like those like really crappy Alico platforms.
Nice.
So I think that's going to be the move forward. I think that they're trying to really make it, this official thing with a lot of money in it.
Yeah, nice. And that's sort of what I wanted to get into next, sort of talking about federation shifts, because again, it's sort of hard to explain to people. I sort of relate it to people. I feel like drug tested powerlifting in the US right now is like what weightlifting was like going up against the USSR back in the day. It was easier at world championships because there was less Russian weightlifters there. And a similar thing sort of developed for a little bit in the USAPL when they were no longer the IPF, like the International Drug Tested Powerlifting Federation. There was that split, but then because so many of the top lifters in the US stayed in the USAPL, which is now in Australia, but we're not even going to get into that at this stage. But now a lot of the top guys, what I'm hearing and what I understand of where you're going, they're heading back to Powerlifting America or whatever the actual IPF affiliate is. Is that just Sheffield, like just sticking a flag in the sand, or is it other things and other changes to the federation that's prompted this?
I think Sheffield is representative of the vision that SBD, is obviously the big money behind it, but just the vision that the IPF route is taking powerlifting in. I think USAPL really had the opportunity to do that because, of course, they had all the members when the split happened, and then because the USAPL didn't have to now pay the IPF hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, we're like, okay, we have a big chunk of cash and all the talent. We can keep everybody here. And I think a lot of people stayed because the foundation was there. But then as time kind of went on, I mean, USAPL dropped the ball. They dropped the ball on the production quality of the big competitions. They dropped the ball on financial distribution. They dropped the ball on media. It just the people in charge, I guess, didn't recognize like how valuable the lifters were to their federation and what they could actually accomplish. And I think they let a lot of really big opportunities kind of slip through their fingers. Whereas, SBD basically gets to say, okay, well, we'll do everything for the IPF and get to a point where this looks like a pro sport. I think David Wilson made a video recently about that, how like Powerlifting America Nationals, like as soon as someone hit a lift, like it could be a third attempt squat, there was already a highlight reel up on Instagram for it. So it's just like, it's not just the money of Sheffield, but it's actually making this feel like it's a sport. And now that you have more people who left over the past year, I mean, we don't want to compete against nobody, right? So everyone is going to leave now.
So that's it. Once that hole in the bottom of the bucket opened up and a few athletes started jumping over, it just sort of seemed like it kept picking up momentum. It makes a lot of sense what you're talking about, because that's it. And even seeing it, like I didn't process like what it was that I was picking up on, because I saw the Virginia Pro, right? And I saw a couple of the USAPL Pro Series meets, and there was more money. And I think that they thought that was enough. And I think that is such a big thing. But like you're saying with Sheffield, it's the entire production, like not having the platform at fucking ground level. Like literally just having the platform on a stage, which it's probably hard to have a stage that can handle fucking Jesus Oliveira squatting close to fucking 500 kilos on it without an insurance risk or something like that. But that was elevated. The way that they can follow John Keiko off stage when he walked past Gavin Aiden, like you are never gonna, how many moments like that have we missed that could have elevated the sport just because of the way they set up their live streams? Whereas, I think they were just like, let's just get 10 grand together. That'll do. That'll keep all the talent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really boils down to the people in charge of this actually having enthusiasm for this kind of stuff, right? Like the USAPL had the money in their hands, but nobody who's on the EC or nobody who's like a staff member is like losing sleep at night thinking, oh, we could do this, we could do that. It's like there needs to be that hunger in the people who are in charge of this to really make it happen. And I think SBD or like like Marshall Powell, for example, he's the fifth guy on Powerlifting Now, and then he also runs the media for Powerlifting America. Like he's one of those guys who's like, I want to make this look like a production.
Do you think it's like, because it's tough, because the IPF, like people aren't meant to be making heaps and heaps and heaps of money. Like that's not meant to be their incentive structure for putting on those things. But then with SBD, it seems like they do have that incentive, because the bigger and bigger of a production they put on, obviously they want to recover the hundreds of thousands of dollars that they're putting up for prize money. And there is that incentive for them. Whereas I guess, when you're involved strictly organizationally, it kind of does rely on you doing it for the love of the game, I guess. Yeah. But then I understand why you don't want to open up opportunities for people to make even more money within the purely organizational side of powerlifting. Moving on from this, though, can you speak to some of the rule changes that now you have to deal with? Because, again, the stereotypical bench press that fires up comment sections, that's one of the things that the IPF is. Was that purely social media-driven pressure as well? Can you sort of tack on your thoughts on that? I mean, like where the rule change come from, what it was, how your experience has sort of been adapting to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I can't speak for how the president of the IPF feels or who was directly involved in the decision, but it definitely seemed like a social media driven decision. I think we've seen in the past couple years prior to the rule change a lot of and this is the thing is like, if you have a really small frame and you're utilizing, a max grip and a big arch, it looks ridiculous. You know what I mean? You have a lot of like smaller female lifters or just like smaller male lifters who are pressing, 300 plus, 400 plus. And it got a lot of social media notoriety, as arch bench pressing always has. I think it was the start of last year. That there's now this bench depth rule, where, as it's written in the rule book, and we could talk about all the problems that come with this, but as it's written in the rule book, it's that the tip of the elbow, right? So like if you're the head judge looking directly at the bench presser in front of you, the tip of the elbow has to be below the middle of the shoulder joint.
That seems like, because I thought it was the crest of the anterior delt. Not sure on the wording, but so the AC joint, is that what they're like? Hypothetically, you pretend you have X-ray vision and you're estimating the position of the AC joint.
Exactly.
In real time.
Yep.
Which judge? Just center.
All of them. So that's the thing, is that, yeah. So like if you're there we go. Let's get into it. It's like, if you're, the head judge and you see depth being off, right? If you were the only judge who could call depth, then the person would get white lights no matter what, right? Because then you have
true. No, you're right. Yeah.
Right. So every judge is permitted to call on depth, but I mean, it's already difficult enough, right? Because with squat, you at least have this singularity where the hip crease meets at one point roughly, right? But
just quickly as well, because I had to cut you off there, I'm confused on that now as well, because to some interpretations of a squat depth rule set require you to pretend you have X-ray vision, or is it crest of the top of the things you can see objectively?
They say it's in the rule book on squat, it's hip crease, so it's literally just where that
you can see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but with the bench rule, obviously we can't see the joint. But now it's like, it's already difficult enough to judge that, I think, from the front. Not to mention, you also, and this is the thing, right? It's like with bench press, you have to pause. So as a head judge, you're also responsible for making sure the bar is motionless and then giving a press command. So you're simultaneously being given the task of, let me watch the bar is motionless, but then let me also check that both elbows are to
both sides.
Because you can get a red light if one is deep enough and one is high. So that's another thing, is like, if you have an asymmetrical person in front of you, then you have to look at the chest, the left, the right. And then if you're a side judge, you're also being tasked with judging elbow depth. And if it's already hard enough from the front, it's going to be very difficult at some, undisclosed angle, whether you're in front or behind the bench press or to the side. And then you're also tasked with watching whether or not the butt comes up, whether or not there's up and down on the bar during the press. Like, there's just a lot to watch for. So I haven't seen it, in all honesty. I think that the solution to all of this has just been lenient judging, because I've seen a lot of like very borderline like elbow depths get passed at a high level. And I think judges are probably like, I'm not going to over scrutinize something I don't even have.
Benefit of the doubt overdrive.
Yeah. I mean, I would hate to be a judge who is throwing red lights at lifters and, getting, into controversy either at the meet or on social media, when you don't even feel like 100% conviction in your call. Because it's probably a difficult thing to judge in real time.
What do you think about the thought that the IPF just bent over and got cucked by a bunch of people who will never even participate in a powerlifting meet? Or do you think that there are people who are genuinely G'd up about powerlifting who see that and they're like, nah, I don't relate to that anymore? Like, what do you think about the realities of the things that people talk about, why the rules should be changed? Because I think that they're made up, personally.
I mean, what I would say is this: there's never been, I guess if I had won a national or world championship, people might say this, but to this point, there's never been someone with that bench technique who has, like, because of that, edged out, a win over someone who used quote unquote honest technique. The number of people in powerlifting who use, extreme arches and max grips is also very low. But I will say there are definitely people I talk to in the powerlifting community who are like really, successful coaches or lifters themselves who do have an overall negative view of very short range of motion pressing. It's obviously not, something, it's not a hill they're willing to die on, but they are.
No, but they have a perspective on it. They're like, nah, it's just, I think it should be longer than that. Yeah, because that's
exactly.
reasonable, I think. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, I feel the same way about it too. Like I did it because I could, and it's legal.
But you've always been open about it. You've been like, this seems pretty dirty to me.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it. I didn't enjoy benching that way. It's not like a fun thing to do.
But no one's 1 inch from bench pressing in their dreams. Everyone's close grip, fucking feet up, just pushing it.
Yep, exactly. And I think it's a bad rule for all the reasons we obviously discussed. But I'm fine with the change itself for my personal sake because I'm open to the challenge, and I know that this is something that people have always held over me over the past several years, where it's like, oh well, you bench this way, so if you ever win, it's like you have this super short range of motion, whatever. So now being at a point where even within what's it been 3 training blocks, I have still almost a year before I have to compete Powerlifting America. Like my bench is already back up to like the top 1% of 83s. Like I'm very happy with that. But one thing I have seen that's very unfortunate is you get guys like Gavin Aiden who don't have big arches, don't bench with max grip, but are just barrel chested and have like a negative ape index, and they get red light because he got red lit at Sheffield for bench depth, and he benches like this and doesn't have a big arch, but because he has a little baby humerus.
Wow.
It doesn't.
He's a good bencher too, isn't he? Well, he's a bit of a total specialist, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he's good. His squat is obviously his specialty, but I mean, he benches in the upper 4s. So missing a bench when you're jumping 7.5 kilos. I mean that matchup in the 93s was close. Where that
insane right now.
Yeah.
Who was the Ukrainian bloke? I think he's been around for a while because I was just thinking about Keiko and Gavin Aiden. Was he Polish or?
So the Ukrainian is in the 105. That's Anatoly.
But did he move down?
No, a Swede won Sheffield this year. It was Gustav Hedlund, and he's been around for a while.
OG equipped guy?
I don't think Gustav competed equipped. Okay. From what I remember, he's always been a raw lifter. I mean, maybe he dabbled early on, but his entire resume in powerlifting has been built raw.
Okay. Quick little segue, because Austin Perkins, he really had his like coming out moment. I can't remember how many meets ago was it. Feels like it was about 6 months ago now. I noticed he also, and a lot of like high schoolers, I guess, in America find equipped powerlifting somehow. That's a really strange thing from an Australian's perspective. Do you think there's anything to be said for just like squatting just super physiological weights in your early days? Like, does that lay any sort of foundation that you think?
I honestly, I mean, I've never competed equipped, but I wouldn't say so. I think that equipped powerlifting in the US, like very, it's like Texas and Louisiana, like a couple of these states down in the South, like just have high school programs, and equipped is where you do it.
But no, they are always Texas. You're right. I never paid attention to that. I've never seen like California equipped powerlifting.
No, it's not nationwide at all. It's like a couple states have it. But if I'm speaking on like Perkins's specific, case, I mean, he spent, I don't know if you've kept up or not, but I mean, he went years without a PR.
Yeah, he was always yapping about Atwood as well. Like I remember him being like, I'm going to beat Atwood like 4 years ago. And my reaction being like, fucking sure. He was squatting like 270. He was very strong at that point, but yeah, it was like squatting 270, pulling about 300, benching maybe like 185 or something like that. So far off. And Taylor had just done the 300 kilo squat in comp. 195 bench, 340 dead. It was just after that performance.
Yeah. No, I mean, Perkins, if you remember, I think it was 2019, he had his first 800 kilo meet where he did squat 300. And then he went 3.5 or 4 years without PRing his squat or his total. And his programming changed up drastically. And that's what has now yielded this this growth spurt again that now seems like it's just unending. So there's nothing about his case, like lifting equip, that makes me think there's like a, this built
other things
for handling heavier weight just because it was on your back before. I mean, he went a pretty long time not really seeing any progress. Same with that. Like if we're talking about Ashton Ruska, like he was also an equipped lifter, early on, and kind of went back and forth. And I mean, he's spent the past couple of years kind of, jumping back and forth between, PR stagnation. So I don't know.
No, Ashton really seems like a feast or famine lifter. I don't think I've ever seen him have like average sort of training. He's either blowing muscles up or just, like you said, just blowing up PRs on the platform, or doing both simultaneously, like blowing some shit up between his second or third deadlift and just switching stances and still being fine.
Yeah,
he seems unshakable. I would hate to be in a real hard powerlifting battle with Ashton Ruska, because you just know whatever comes up, like he's just not going to be phased.
Yep. No, Ashton's one of my good friends, and he's very, very goofy, honestly. Like, just as a person, he's just like very soft-spoken, very goofy. But there is something that turns on meet day where he's like knocking over chalk holes, like, wanting to like punch holes in walls. If he has a sliver of an opportunity to get the job done, he usually does. So yeah, I wouldn't want to face him either.
Yeah, just fucking shout out to Bob Matthews, who seems to be keen for the challenge. Going back to so that's what I actually wanted to talk about. Just in terms of like changing to like views on the programming model, because we'll get into the coach change and what changes you've specifically made to your training recently, if there's been any major ones. But to what you were saying before, like Perk has gone on streaks of making progress. A lot of lifters do, and then they stop making progress. And it can be really, really hard to isolate a variable in someone's training success, right? Because there's like life stresses, what they're eating, how they're sleeping, and then their actual programming. How do you sort of view that? Because coming from a place of, I really buy into reactive training systems, and like building out your golden micro, and then just trying to develop that over time and trying to like zero in over time on that golden micro cycle. But like, do you think where are you at with that sort of thought process? Because then it does seem like things can just stop working for whatever reason, and you do just need something different. Like, do you agree with those statements? Shit question, bit of waffle there, but
no, you're good. I mean, I would say that the idea of trying to build this ideal layout still stands. I think what makes you a good coach, though, is, like you said, if there are times where stuff stops working, it's what to look at in terms of why did it stop working, right? So I was having a conversation with someone about this who I recently started working with, and I was talking to him about like what I expect from athletes communication wise. And like one of the things I was telling him is that, really reliable communication from the athlete kind of involves like a pre, a during, and a post, if you had to describe how like the feedback for a session is broken up. Because a pre, not to get into details, right? But like if you were giving me a pre-session analysis or summary, you would be detailing all the externals coming into the day and how you were feeling. That basically set the stage for, okay, we have an expectation for how this day is going to go based on the program itself. Either that's going to be facilitated by the good externals coming in, or we expect them to negatively impact it. Then we have the during, which is the reality of the situation. And then the post is like your reflection of like what you felt during the session. Like, bar felt heavy on my back. My lower back was smoked. Felt like I forgot how to squat. Like there's all these different things that an athlete can say. And I was telling him how important this was for the feedback to be detailed in that way, because, we could get to the end of a training block and, have like a really, subpar underperforming, like end of block. Like you have your heaviest primary sessions to finish a block. And it could be uncharacteristically bad for all the previous week, meaning that like this primary was uncharacteristically bad compared to all the primaries of the previous week, or it's just been bad the entire block, right? So like if we set the stage for which of those, I guess, cases you fall into, that drastically changes how I would approach changing the program, right? Like if we fall flat at the end of a block when we don't expect to, that might dictate how I like actually pace the block, but might overall still see the layout as being successful. Whereas if you're just consistently having poor primaries, I'm like, okay, we need to actually take a look at what you're doing on the other days to see if that's impacting this day, whether it's too much, too little, too far away, too close. Like it's really just something where you have enough experience where any bit of feedback you're given and any performance that's brought in front of you, like you're able to look at that session, but then you're also able to look at the surrounding sessions and be able to say, you know what, I think that secondary day needs to be heavier for this primary to feel better. Or, you know what, that secondary is too far away from your primary for you to feel practice coming into this day. Or, maybe these rep ranges aren't working. I mean, there's a million different cases we can, discuss in that scenario, but that's pretty much how all of us still program, I would say. I don't think we really see any coaches like making big changes from block to block, making big additions of volume week to week. Like everything is kind of, let's be static with the layout, progress the load. Did this layout work? If yes, rerun it with minor changes. If not, let's sit down and have a conversation.
Well, because even if it's not working, you kind of can still only make minor changes. Because I guess if you do a complete overhaul, you still lose the ability to then know what actually worked. It can be a painful situation. I think something as well that is a common thought process in the powerlifting world that's not really adopted just for like normie strength training, or maybe like when strength and conditioning coaches are thinking about strength training. I feel like in powerlifting, it's almost like you're running a squat program, a bench program, and a deadlift program just interwoven with each other. But like in their own right, each lift could have its own strategy. Whereas I feel like when other people are talking about maybe the way that they respond to different types of programming, they'll be like, yeah, I'm a low volume guy, or like, no, I'm more of a higher rep guy. What I'm seeing in powerlifting coaching now as it advances, people being like, yeah, so my deadlift is like this, technically speaking, so like this is my approach for it, versus my squat, like, and just talking about is completely different lifts, and like I said, almost feeling like three separate programs. What's your perspective on that? Is it common for people to when their training is more successful to have pretty different strategies for approaching each lift, or are they more the outliers? And then like, how do we test responses to different types of training? Like, what are your windows for being like, oh, higher rep deadlift is the approach for me? Like, is that because, you did 8 weeks of it and you were hitting PRs, or does the testing process look different to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you're to your first question. I mean, it is essentially 3 different programs, right? Because your response can be something that, your response to a certain style of training for a lift, like we might not have anything visible on you to determine like, oh yeah, this makes sense why you respond that way. But sometimes we do, leverage wise. Sometimes we have just your historical training data to suggest that one way of doing things worked and one way didn't. But yeah, I mean, when I sit down to program, like assuming I have information on what you've historically done, there's probably some element of that that's going to be preserved, especially if you're someone who is, who's been lifting for a very long period of time, right? Because your window of things that you like can do and progress gets smaller as time goes on. So chances are, if you've been running something in recent history that has worked and you've been lifting for a decade, like there's probably more validity to that. Whereas if you're 17 years old and you had a coach for 6 months, you're like, oh, I do really well squatting 3 days a week. Like, shut up. You just started.
Yeah, like, sure you do.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, right? Like I'm probably going to be more inclined to start like quote unquote from scratch with someone like that. But it really is, I'll give you like a good example. I had just released a programming for poorly leveraged deadlifters video on Powerlifting Now. And like one of the things that I talked about with that video was how, something like a high rep deadlift like might not work for this person. The microcycle layout itself might, require, more spacing between the primary squat and the primary deadlift. If you're in a place where you have a lot of trouble getting your deadlift to progress, or when things start to pick up intensity wise, kind of just, your deadlift tanks, like maybe putting deadlifts at the beginning of the week is like a useful strategy. So, I mean, when I sit down, it's never like, okay, there's an overarching system that then gets applied to all three lifts. Like I'm sure we see this in the general strength world all the time, where it's like we're running a hypertrophy program and you open the sheet and it's like squat 3x8, bench 3x8, deadlift 3x8. Like that never happens.
Yeah,
right?
true. Yeah.
You sit. I mean, I'll literally tell you what my process is. I will open my notes with a new lifter that I'm starting with, and I'll just put Monday through Sunday, and whatever days that person can train. And I will just start trying to decide which lift is going to go on which day and which like tier of that day is going on which day. So like, am I going to start the week with the primary deadlift? Am I going to start the week with the secondary squat? Like it's literally just mixing and matching, because once I've looked at the program, I have an idea roughly of like, okay, this person's going to be doing higher rep stuff, lower reps. This person's going to be doing a pause squat versus just all comps. So once I have that rough idea, right, then I'll actually go sit down and try to figure out the schedule. Like, how do you marry these programs that like are very different, right, to make sure that you get the most out of all of them, right? I wouldn't want to put like, for someone who's, really sensitive to intensity and like really needs to recover well, in order to perform well, like I'm probably not going to be inclined to have them, squat and deadlift with no day of rest in between, or I'm not going to be inclined to put those primaries at the end of the week. Like maybe that those days would start the microcycle, whereas some people need to like have heavier days that build up into their primaries. So their primaries would go at the end of the microcycle. Like you're trying to marry, like you said, potentially three very disparate ways of programming so that you can progress them all accordingly. And like the pace you push for each of them could be different. Like you could be very aggressive with your starting point RPs on bench and have a very like linear progression to them. Whereas like you could be training deadlift in the same block length, but it's like really light, kind of heavy, and then super heavy. You know what I mean? So there's a lot. There's a lot.
Just thinking if I've been just raw dogging the start of my week too hard. I'm a big fan because I only train 4 days a week in the gym, and like I come off like 2 days of rest coming into my Monday workout, and I try to hit my big strength session. But it is because of like fatigue cost later in the week and where I'm trying to fit it in. But I'm like, I wonder if I'd get like way better performances on my top end sets if I pushed it to my second session. But then again, because there could be a day in between those sessions. This is the thing. I can't be optimizing my variable, but it's getting my wheels turning. Would you say it's rare for powerlifters to be very successful with the primary day on the first workout of the week? Assuming they're taking a weekend off. So some people can just come in. They don't necessarily need anything to get them going for the week. Just straight in, not carrying any fatigue, hit a filthy squat or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that I've definitely been experimenting with a lot of my like much stronger guys, is just having their micro start on like a Saturday. Because like if you're competing on a Saturday, let's say, then and you want to have
that's some red pill shit.
Yeah, so like let's say that you're competing on a Saturday, and we know that like we just want to take any guesswork out of this. So, we want to put your primary squat and bench, let's say, on the Saturday session. I mean, if you start the microcycle on the Saturday, then, there's never a exceedingly heavy like secondary that then precedes that day. So I find a lot of like, really, really strong lifters benefit from, because that's one of the things you run into with super strong guys is like, of course you need to figure out like fundamentally what works when we're talking about frequency, days between the lifts, rep ranges, overall volume, like all of that needs to be found out. But for a lot of the really strong guys, like the key to really get them progressing consistently and keeping them healthy really is just like the pacing of things, right? So the way that would work is, you described it, right? Like you start the week off with your heavy lift, but if you're doing it on a Monday, then maybe you have, you're not competing on a Monday ever, right? So we're taking that same, principle and just putting it on the Saturday session. And it's like, if you finish your heaviest week and crush your primaries, then like, anything you get out of your secondaries is just a bonus. You might be destroyed and those secondaries, you might be torched and it's basically a throwaway, but you got your primary out of the way. Like we have proof now that what we're doing is working. And if you have anything like left in the tank for the end of the week, great. But I mean, like I said before, there are plenty of cases where that's not the case, where we need to have, you know, a secondary that is now heavier than the previous week to yield an even better primary. So there are plenty of times where both are applicable.
Yeah, because I think that that's like a downside of the real hardcore reactive approach that I ran into with one of my weightlifters, because like that was the thing, like we were trying to hit a big clean and jerk. He was like, oh, can we shift our big CJ session to Tuesday? Because again, culturally in weightlifting, everyone loves Big Friday, but everyone competes on Saturday as well. And that was the thing, like I shifted his big CJ session to Tuesday, but I'm like, this doesn't matter. Like, because, and this guy is ambitious. He will end up competing internationally, and then it changes. Then you can be competing on a fucking Tuesday or a Wednesday or something like that. But it's like literally until that point, like I'm like, we do just need to like shoehorn your primary day into a set. Like we need to find some way to make this work. It's so hard, but when there's no professional fucking powerlifters, everyone has fucking jobs. I feel like there's just this thing in the adult population where they just fatigue into the later week because of their fucking job and their life as well. And like you just, with people where powerlifting is their top priority, obviously you can overcome that. But like, yeah, I don't know. Obviously, this is just fucking lifestyle things that separate top lifters from good lifters. But yeah, have you experienced the pitfalls of bottoms up, or do you think because you're a bit of a high performer, you've always managed to? Because I feel like it's a high performance thing to identify a bit more as a machine. I guess is what I'm getting at.
Gotcha. No, I mean, I would say that you know, the concept from like the emerging strategies RTS side of things were really like revolutionary because they did popularize this idea that we don't need to have more macro scale phasing of training, but in reality there might be something that looks really, you know, daily undulating. We might have something that really looks non-specific that works to get the best top end performance out of somebody, right? So that was just, I think, the start of like this hyper individualization, which then became like this quote unquote golden microcycle. But I think that the difference is that the pure emerging strategies model involves no progression in programmed exertion across a block, right? It's
super static.
Yeah, exactly. It's purely, hey, here's the program to have, like, you're gauging sort of top sets, right? We're going to be as specific as possible so that the data we extract is as reliable as possible, right? The fight's usually like by 1 at 8. And it's like, we're just going to see how long you can run this without petering off. Like most of us, I would say, don't take that approach, right? Like we have the approach of actually being top down with the rate of RP progression. And then along with that, like block. You know, you when you start with a lifter, you might be more open-ended or kind of bottoms up. You know, and this is another thing I was telling one of the guys I started with is like, I am going to be more bottoms up and reactive when we begin, because maybe you are someone where, you know, we need higher exertion throughout the block on average. Maybe you're someone who needs very low exertion in the beginning. Maybe your block length is going to be 4 weeks. Maybe it's going to be 6 weeks. So it's like, I'll give you an example. If you start my program and we do the first week and you have a top set at RP6, it wouldn't make sense for me with no information to then progress that 6 to a 7 in the following week, because there's literally no data to be extracted from 1 week of training. There's none. Yeah. Because someone could go up, someone could go down, and it literally, at that point, it's far more a result of whatever was happening before we started than it is that 1 week, right? So you need at least 2 weeks to get any information, right? But like if you go up, 20 kilos at a 6, like does it really make sense for me to be as top down and like force some sort of really aggressive, progression up to like a 9 within a 4 or 5 week period? Like probably not. I can probably sit back and kind of let you make more incremental progress. And like maybe you are someone who really can and does need like a 6-week push, but maybe you're not, right? But once we get that information about like pacing and basically does this person have an intensity threshold past which they drop off, until we gather that information, we might be bottoms up. But past that point, I mean, we're programming specific block lengths. A lot of times when you get to know an athlete, it basically becomes percentage-based training again, where, if you have a system that that works, the pace that needs to be pushed, you're probably going to be writing in RPEs, but you're probably going to be writing in loads as well.
Like what you really mean. Yeah, the specific numbers you'll be thinking about when you're writing down a 7. Which I think is something that a lot of people don't necessarily want to admit. Like, and that's what I mean by like the laissez-faire shit show. It's like, let's just go in and see what happens. Like, from a biopsychosocial perspective, I think high performers convince themselves that their body is a predictable machine that will progress. And like there will be times where that perspective is challenged by what's actually happening. But that's something I notice all my best performers who make the best progress, like they have an expectation about things. Like they really do balance that top down, bottoms up in their own head better than a lot of other people, I think.
Yeah. I mean, when we write out programs for people that we have a really solid grasp on, like if you look at the cell for the prescribed load, like if you go to the week 4, like we're just working backwards. Like it's going to say, 300 kilos minus 20, minus 15, minus 15. And then it works back to that's the load you're going to be taking. Like, does it even matter if you could do 2.5 less or 2.5 more? Like, I mean, maybe, but that's just the number you need to do on that day to continue to move along toward, the end of this block. Right. So like, one of my lifters, Sawyer, today he should be loading, I think either 385 or 390 kilos on deadlift. Jesus. And like, you open a spreadsheet and his prescription is just 390 minus 30, minus 25, minus 25. And like, that's how we work backwards, to the start of the block.
So I do see a lot of conflicting ideas where we want to absolutely have a gold standard of technique for each 3 of the lifts. And we want to try and get each of our lifters as close as like a template approach to that. And then there's other sort of lifting advice where the technique needs to be just good enough and they just need to get stronger. What are your thoughts on that? Where do you sort of lie across those two sides of the arguments?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a 3-prong approach to this, and there's a talk that Brad Couliard did at a seminar last fall that I think summarizes this really well. Is like, does your technique allow you to meet the competition standard? Does it allow you to train durably without high likelihood of injury? And does it allow you to have a high success rate at high percentages? Right. The first 2 are pretty self-explanatory, but it's like when we're talking about like good technique, right? Obviously, we can see some pretty horrendous technique and say, okay, like maybe that does need to be changed. But functionally, what people are kind of worried about is whether or not this is going to lead to injury. And if that hasn't happened at this point, then you're probably safe in that regard. But I would say probably the more common thing you see with certain like unorthodox or maybe like quote unquote not clean techniques is that every time you load, 95% or 98% or whatever, it's just a roll of the dice if you're going to hit it or if something stupid is going to happen. Like you're going to shift your heels too hard in the bottom of your squat and, lose control of your center of mass, or the same thing's going to happen on a deadlift. I mean, I guess saying, you could probably boil it down most of the time to, does this technique allow you to manage your center of mass? Like if that is taken care of, chances are like, your technique is good,
It's just one of those things as well where it's like, yeah, even though I'm like, cat back deadlifts are fine, still never seen anyone cat back a world record conventional. Maybe a junior world record, but yeah, like you do see, like I said,
yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. If you're cat backing a deadlift, you are saying, I am willing to, forego struggling off the floor for a disproportionately difficult lockout. So that falls into that 3rd prong of my approach, which is that there is not like an even distribution of likelihood that you're going to make the lift, right? Like if I'm thinking about someone who benches with like a flat back and a super close grip and they take, 95% of their max, I'm probably going to be able to predict with a very high likelihood how much more they have because their ability to grind probably scales really well with the increased bar load. Whereas if I have a massive arch and a super short range of motion, I could go up 5 kilos and smoke it, or I misgroove it a tiny bit and it's stable, and I think that's really the biggest thing when we're talking about technique, because it correlates with exactly what you're saying. It's like the cat back is ugly, but functionally, like, what does that mean for being a successful athlete? It means that you might you might not get this lift with a high success rate, even though you're quote unquote strong enough to do it.
I think there's sometimes over reliance on technique, where when you talked about that bench example, where it's the slight deviation from your sort of standard can throw a lift off completely. Is that what you're trying to say, or
Well, I
did I
mean, with like,
misrepresent what you said?
no, I think with the bench, it's just a reality that you have to face when you decide to lift that way. Um, and, like with the bench example, I think specifically, I mean, we're talking about, potentially getting 10, 20, 25 extra kilos of weight. So it's like, okay, I'm willing to risk going 2 for 3 more often if it means that my second attempt is 15 kilos higher than what my third attempt would be if I didn't use this technique. But I would say in general, I think that, we, we want to probably avoid techniques that just lead to, I guess, inconsistent execution.
Can we talk about your 9/11 day on the topic of execution?
Yeah,
Attempts
absolutely.
was
Yeah,
fucking
yeah,
memes that played out in real life. Because like just to contextualize it, I already found it impressive because like I know about sport and competing in sport and trying to stay composed when things aren't going your way. I now have the added benefit toward doing my own powerlifting meet and just skipping my last deadlift attempt because I was fucked. I also checked out a bench press. Like I was deliberately not getting aroused for bench press. So it was literally 3 publicly done squat attempts and then 1 deadlift attempt on a platform that drained the fuck out of me. How the fuck did you get through 9 competition attempts? Or were you fried? How'd you because you deadlifted good, didn't you?
Oh no,
After that, like
I felt great on deadlifts. I mean, I think I would say a couple things to that. So the first thing, just on the day, if we're talking about like purely mentality, I mean, I I thought it was funny. Like it at first bothered me, like on the platform for the first attempt that it happened. So for anybody listening who doesn't know, the USAPL at some point in 2022 decided that they were going to make a rule about how you can hold the bar, where you couldn't basically like crank your wrist back and like cup the bar with your fingers rather than taking a full grip around it. And then at the start of the new year, they got rid of that rule. They said, you know what, it's 2023. So 2022, or sorry, 2023, they made that rule. Start of 2020, wait, where am I at in years? Anyway, the following year, they came out and said, you know what, like this rule is really ambiguous. Yeah, it was 2024. Okay, I got it right. They were like, the rule doesn't really make sense. We're going to get rid of it. Some of the judges at the meet, I guess, didn't get the memo that that rule was no longer a rule. So I'm benching my second attempt. I press it, and I'm given a red light for how I hold the bar. Coach goes to the jury. The jury says, okay, yeah, this isn't a rule. We're going to give you a relift. So I take my second attempt again. So this is attempt number 3. I'm taking my second attempt again. Same thing happens where they're saying that the way that I'm holding the bar is still wrong. So I'm holding it there for a bit.
At this point, jury hasn't spoken to the judges, I'm guessing, like for them to just do that again.
So the jury had, I guess, not clearly explained to the judges why it was happening, or like why the lift was good. So I end up taking my second attempt a second time, right? So this is attempt number 3 for my second attempt. Same thing happens. So then I get a relift for my second attempt for the third time. 4th bench press attempt of the day for the second attempt. I get it, but now they're like, okay, well, you've now done this twice. So in that course of time, everyone has already finished all their bench press attempts. So now you have to follow yourself, like in weightlifting. They're like, we're going to put 3 minutes on the clock.
Classic,
and you're going to follow yourself for your third attempt. I think the nice thing is that bench is just inherently not as taxing as the other two. It would probably have been way more difficult than doing it for squat or deadlift. But I definitely was just lighthearted enough about it because it was just so ridiculous. I've had bench technicalities and stuff like that happen to me before. Also, it's the Arnold. Like, I'm not really too, if it was nationals, maybe I would have been a bit more fired that was happening. But I mean, I was definitely like fried in the moment. Like after doing those 5 bench attempts, I've never been more beat up within a competition. But external to that, I mean, I've trained like full SBD days, sometimes twice a week for the past 6 years, 7 years. I've done, I think, almost 30 meets at this point. Like I'm conditioned to do all 3 lifts pretty heavy on a weekly basis within the same day. I know how meets go, so I know how much to drink, how much to caffeinate. Like I always say it, like meets are very not exhausting. Like in the moment, like after the adrenaline dump and all that, when the meet's over, sure, I'm like ready to sleep. But during the meet itself, it's never something where I'm like, oh, I'm gassed. And I think training conditioning is part of that, but then also like you said, being your first meet, it's totally out of your element. Like the timing of it is no longer yours. But when you've done it enough times, like when you're not drinking enough, when you're not eating enough, and you pick up on it before it's too late. Which for a lot of people, when they don't know, it's usually too late by the time they realize.
I think that was the thing for me. It was like I did try to get wound up for squats because I know I needed to be wound up. But I think even with bench press, where I was trying to be chill because I just don't care about that lift. I'm not good at it. I haven't put in the work. I'm trying to change, but I haven't done any of those things yet. But I still think coming out to do my little bench presses, I think my heart rate still got up just because of the crowd aspect of it. Yeah. And that was just, let alone the fact that I just never have had to get G'd up 3 times in a day. So I think there was that mental component as well. And I didn't eat all day because I was like, all I bought was like fucking sweet snacks. I had so much pre-workout. I saw everyone else just pounding like rice and salt, which now I fully understand. It's like they probably weren't hungry either. They're just doing it knowing that like, you're going to be fucked for deadlift if you. This is for me, again, relentlessly roasting powerlifters for like eating candy in between sets, which I still think is like completely unnecessary. But again, I'm not making fun of powerlifters for eating candy in between sets anymore when I'm there gassing out on my fucking second attempt deadlift. Yeah. So I had to eat some humble pie there. Powerlifting conditioning. It's a fucking thing. It's the biggest fucking just meme of all time. Turns out it is a thing. I got triggered this morning because someone was doing a post about, actually a shout out to Manning Jeffrey, one of my good friends who also supports this stupid view in my opinion. I hate it when people talk about RPE and reps in reserve as if they're different things. My understanding is that the guy who fucking invented it was like, RPE is a representative of reps in reserve. What do you think about it? I shouldn't have loaded the question like that because if you feel a certain type of way, obviously I've just called you an idiot. I respect your opinion though. What are your thoughts on this?
No, I mean, Mike Tashir, I think, adopted the RPE scale for powerlifting and specifically made it as 10 minus RIR. And that's always the way I've used it as an athlete. No, I don't. I mean, you leave far too much to interpretation when you make it some sort of like objective, it feels like an 8, but it's like a hard 8, or it's I grind really well, so it's only like. No, I mean,
no, I know what you mean. No, I know what you mean.
Yeah. No, but, I've always programmed it as 10 minus RIR. How many reps you have left in the tank on a given lift is, it's correlated to your percentage, a percentage of 1RM, correlated to bar speed. And like, as a coach, if you find that someone can't push to an 8 as often as another person, then like that gives you a piece of information to work off of. But regardless, I'm always programming it as if you send me an 8 and I ask you, do you think you could have done 2 more reps? And the answer is no, then it wasn't an 8.
Yeah. And because I think as well, like people will, like I'm okay with people saying how I'm choosing to use RP differently. Like I'm redefining it for myself. I just hate being told that they're separate fucking systems because I'm like, do you you just know that they haven't gone to the fucking source. Anyway, I'm getting way too fucking fired up about this because I understand that people want another metric. Like they're just like, oh, no, I just subjectively want to talk about my feelings and I value subjective data. And I think that that's a warranted conversation because, again, I think people don't value subjective data enough that Yeah, just that's, and because again, it's always the people who think that RPE, and RAR are different that are the biggest critics of RPE. I'm like, no, it's trying to be objective about things. It's just trying to find an easy way to account for daily readiness. I know we've both roasted VBT, but you ended up flirting with one for a little bit. I don't think I've seen you continue with it. What was that experimentation like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not worth it.
Back to eyeballing it.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty useless. I don't really see any reason to be using a velocity tracker, even if
you're not pitching a baseball, you know, like.
And it's exactly. I don't really see a reason for it. You know, I wanted to try it just to see what information I could gather from it. Like, even if you are really good at collecting data with it, I just don't see the practicality of it. I really don't. Especially like I've seen people bring them to meets and you're in the warm-up room. Like, what do you do if you you take your last warm-up and you're like, oh geez, it's 0.2 slower than my last primary day, the meet's over. Like, no, like just don't even look at that. You ruin your whole day. Just go out there and, like, honestly, there's definitely a benefit to just being a, you know, just nose down, get it done kind of person. Like, I think there are people who probably overshoot their water cut and are truly dehydrated by the time they hit the platform, but they are convinced that they're going to squat well, and they probably do way better than if they're like, oh, I lost 4.7% of my total body weight. And, you know, the data says that I'm going to be too dehydrated to lift appropriately. It's just, you know, just not a
little nocebo box. I also the one other thing, other than it just being generally superfluous, I think the other thing that I don't necessarily like about it is I don't take it easy on my warm-ups, but I don't feel the need to send like a 60 kilo squat into fucking orbit, because I just feel like there's just a feel to your squat, and I can rock it 30% of my max so fucking hard that it's not representative of my technique. And I just feel like you just got everyone in there just motherfucking just sets with the bar, which, like I said, some people just warm up like that. But yeah, I just don't know if I'm even trying to go max fucking velocity with a lot of my weight. So then I don't know if that's even good info. And
yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is, like, you can have warm-ups that move, like, even at heavier percentages, you can have warm-ups that move maybe faster than a previous week, but like maybe it moves faster on the reading because, you know, you shifted out of your center of mass a bit harder, or you squatted down really hard. So it ends up just being this like very jerky sort of squat where maybe the average velo reading is higher, but if you squat like that on your next one, you're going to get pinned. Whereas if your reading were a little slower on the warm up, but you just like perfectly stayed over the midfoot, like it was a very uniform ascent, maybe your grindability on the top set is just better. You know, it's
if you try to squat as fast as possible, you will extend your knees earlier than normal. I have a belief, this comes from Franz Bosch, like glutes need time to contract, in my opinion. People who like full send concentric velocity of a squat, I'm like, that's not how you squat under load, unless you plan on dumping the fucking bar over your head. All right, that was refreshing to have my biases validated. I'm curious to see if you'll have any helpful advice for this question. This will be a challenge for you. All right. So previously, I've sort of asked you about, you know, how do you construct the 5 or 6 day bench press microcycle? I'm going to take you in the complete opposite direction. I want my bench to go up. I'm not willing to bench more than 2 days a week just because I have other things going on in my program. What it looks like currently, I'm willing, we can add more sets. So I just do 3 sets on one bench day, 3 sets on the other bench day. One of them will be like usually like sets of 3 on the lower side. The other are typically sets of 5 plus. Reasonable proximity to failure because I'm so fucking weak at bench. It's not really relevant in the grand fatigue scheme of things, other than to bench press in of itself. Is there anything you can do with that, or is it, like you said, just like show up, find 2 productive bench press workouts? Like, is there anything more we can do with that? And just being very patient, of course.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is very limited info here. But if I had to imagine, right, just like what your, you know, I mean, this is the case for everybody, but, you know, usually your reasons for not progressing on a lift could be, you know, I guess split up amongst let's just simplify it, maybe like 3 simple categories. It's like you need more tissue to support
Yeah.
movement. Your technique sucks and you need more refinement of the
Yeah.
technique under heavier loads, or you just need like more overall stimulus. So there's I guess, a bottleneck for how much more you can do with only doing 2 days.
We may have hit all 3 there because, like, that's the thing. Like, I can't grind. like what you were saying about unreliable techniques, that is me. Like, I have had a grind occasionally, but a lot of it is just like moving good, doesn't fucking move.
Yeah.
Like, does that scream technical? Or not necessarily? Like,
yeah, I mean, maybe. I've never paid attention to your bench, or maybe you've never even posted it.
I hide it.
Have you ever posted it?
It's up there. I'll send you some videos because I'm sort of curious if you just look at it and if anything would sort of leap out.
I mean, I'm sure there are technical things that could probably help you bench a bit more. I wouldn't doubt that, but
yeah.
I mean, if your technique sucks and you're only benching 2 days a week, and you also just don't have like a ton of muscle in the upper body, then like probably working at the poles, so to speak, would be the best way to approach it. So like building tissue on both days, and then also practicing the heavy movement on both days. Like you have.
Do you reckon top set both days and then just rep work back off might be like simpler and more effective?
Yeah, probably, because like if muscle mass is holding back your bench, but you also need to practice the movement. I mean, the luxury, so to speak, of benching 2 days is there's no way that you're going to be like, overtrained or touching the top end too often by doing it.
Don't get cute with it. Just fucking go bet. Like, but do both. Then do the top end, but then find things that will build tissue as well, or rep ranges.
Yeah, I mean, I bet you could do something like, a top single on one day and like a top double on the other day, and like both days have higher rep back downs to follow them.
It's not gross to do a top double and then a back off of 10, is it? Or is that a bit gross?
No. I mean, there are plenty of times where you program a low rep and then go do, 8s or something afterward.
All right, fuck yeah, we're absolutely cooking. I don't know, that got me so the other thing as well, like I just feel like on top of no pecs, I got no pump handle. Is that what is it pretty much just create a fulcrum for the pecs?
I mean,
are you thinking about that at all though? Or is it more just like, okay, get yourself close to the bar. Don't just go all in on just like sternum. Well, you're almost touching like ribs as well. Can you explain that?
Well, yeah, I mean, my ability to open up the rib cage. I mean, my rib cage is just open all the time, basically. So I can't speak on cartilage. I can't speak on any active sort of things that I have focused on to improve that. I mean, that's been something I've had for years. But I mean, one thing that I think is just really useful for, I guess getting as much reach up to the bar is almost thinking about the rib cage in the back as like the moldable parts of your body when you're benching, and the points of tension are, your hands pushing into the bar, which then pushes your neck into the pad, and then your feet. It's like, let those be the 2 points where you're pushing force through to then move this extremely malleable, movable rib cage. Like, I'm never thinking about how hard can I actively arch, or how hard can I pinch the shoulder blades together, or how hard can I even like pull them down. It's usually like, how relaxed can I keep everything, from the waist up to my chest? How relaxed can I keep all of that? And then how hard can I push into the bar with my hands, and how hard can I push through the legs? And then that's what opens up everything in between. Because if you have those points where you're pushing toward one point, that bridge has to be formed.
And the soft thing in the middle. But do you bench wearing a belt?
Now I do, because I've started thinking.
So it's more to do with that. Gotcha. I thought up until the weekend that most people did.
A lot of people say when doing rep work or anything, just keep holding your breath, but that sounds a bit counterintuitive from what you're saying. What are your thoughts on like how you hold your breath and how it will affect sort of ribs and stuff like that?
I mean, I've done that before, not like necessarily as like a full-time strategy, but I've done sets on like a single breath before. I mean, it's not fun. It feels like your face is going to explode, but I mean,
100%,
if you could, it helped, because every breath you let out, you're going to have to reset. I think a lot of people and this is normal, obviously, but like every time you exhale and try to push, you're going to flatten yourself out to some degree. So as a set goes on, you're going to have to then, reset that position and not just take the air in, but, maybe remind yourself to push harder through the legs. Maybe remind yourself to, what I usually think about is like, if the bench could flip over, I'm trying to flip it over. Like that's the kind of pressure I'm trying to put into the
But
bench.
you almost look like you're
Yeah.
actively coming up to meet the bar as it's coming down. Or,
Yeah.
or is that me like misreading what you're
No,
thinking?
no. I mean, you're right. The reason, so one of the things I've talked about in my the first video that I released on powerlifting now was like the complete bench arc tutorial, because
What
I'd
people
been
are coming to you for.
exactly I'd been getting asked that for years and had never put out the video. And one of the things that I talk about is what I call like the 90-10 rule, which is basically thinking about letting the bar descend 90% of the way and you try to meet it the other 10%.
Made it.
Yeah, because if you're, every inch that you descend with the bar, the more the bar wants to form your arc, the more it wants to take your pressure from the back of the neck and bring it further down the bench. It just wants to flatten you out, right? So if we just let the bar kind of like have a controlled fall toward our body, we're going to get crushed every time we have to pause. Like it's not going to happen. So usually what I tell people is, the 90-10 rule of trying to meet the bar the extra 10% and almost imagining like, hey, I'm literally too stiff to even get the bar to my chest. Like my range of motion ends here. That's the end of it. I still have another inch to go. Like you have to do the work to get. Or another way to word it is like, don't let the bar beat you to the chest. It's like you should be fighting to create the tension in the backside as you're descending, to be pushing with the legs to get the ribs up. Like everything should be, trying to meet the bar rather than just letting it be this endless pec stretch that, oh, there's my chest. I guess I'm gonna, I guess the bar is gonna stop now.
So would you say you're starting the rep a bit more relaxed and then slowly building the tension in, or is it just always start?
I think that's a fair assessment. Like I said, I do try to create a lot of pressure through the legs and into the bar itself, because the harder I push into the bar when I'm setting up, the harder that pushes me into the pad.
But it still crescendos throughout the lift.
Yeah, and then as I'm bringing, as I've brought the bar out and then start the descent, I don't just think, oh, I set all of my positions already, so I'm good. It's no, I should be incrementally trying harder and harder to push with the leg, harder to push my back into the bench, harder to open up the ribs. So it is, like you're saying, it's a progressive application of more extension, more pressure as you descend, not just everything set at the start. Let me just let the bar come down now.
Damn, I like that. Yep.
This has been a very solid interview, but it might be time to get into the Oscar Bradley Memorial lightning round of questions, because a couple of these are absolutely right up your alley, Sean. So kicking off with our first one. You gave us your top 5 favorite athletes last time. Actually, no, we did have the lightning round still in here. We've taken a break from it. So can I adjust it to powerlifters?
Sure.
Yeah. Top 5 favorite powerlifters all time.
This is tough. Ashton Ruska, definitely
Nice.
up there for me. Big Ashton fan. In the universe where Hack stayed natural, I mean, Hack was just too much of like an inspiration when I was like really becoming a good.
Did that hurt when he went untested for you?
Oh yeah. So let's call IPF John Hack. This is in no particular order, but I'm just giving you a top 5.
So I had to segue out of this, but just quickly, if you had to estimate, where do you reckon John Hack would be today if he stayed in the IPF, like stiff bar numbers?
I mean, I think he'd still be at the top. I just don't think he'd be an 83. Like he's just too tall to have stayed in that class. I think he probably would have had to go 93.
The footage of him in 2016, yeah, he looks like a teenager compared to what he does now.
I mean, and he totaled 813 at that point, which back then was the highest total. I mean, even now it's still a top 10 total world.
It isn't in certain ways.
What?
I feel like it both isn't simultaneously. Like in a certain sense, it's crazy going back and watching John Hack and Gibbs have that battle, like with like third attempts that are around like 270 and stuff like that. Like whereas again, it's not a lot. It's just because everyone's just watching the top guys so intently now. Like seeing a fucking 74 total bat.
Yeah.
was one of the most insane performances ever. Case in point. Anyway, back to the fucking top 5. Sorry about that.
Jesus has to be up there. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just literally the most impressive, powerlifter the sport has ever seen. I feel like I have to give some female powerlifters some shine here. I mean, I love Natalie Richards. I think that she's a phenomenal lifter. I would love to see her, reclaim a win from Jad Jacob. All time though, this is tough. I don't know. Another difficult thing for me answering this is like I know so many of them like personally, so it's hard for me to be, and not even necessarily like in a bad way, but it's like it's hard for me almost to like dissociate the athlete from the person. So trying to rate this is very
No, because good character, when you see someone who's a mad cunt, they can be lifting whatever, and you're like, yeah, hell yeah. Whereas like some piece of shit lifting a world record, it's always like, oh, fuck that person.
I honestly,
No,
I love. I can't put him in top 5. See,
no, do it. Come on. Okay, so what I should have said, it's your favorites. I shouldn't have said top 5. I fucked up the wording because I love it when people are like, nah, don't know why. They're not even that good, but I just like it.
No, I mean, that's what I was like. There are people that you like really want to see do well that aren't necessarily like the best. So like, I'll give you like Gustav Hedlund, who won Sheffield this past year, has been someone for years now that I've been like huge fan of. Like he came up around the same time I did, so to see him win is like, this is cool. I'll give it to Keiko. I'll give it to Keiko. He's a good dude. Very, I think currently, well, actually, that's true because Jawan Garrison just broke it. But prior to that, I think Keiko just had the highest local meet, 93 kilo total, consistently 9 for 9, multiple world championships. I think right now he's taking a bit of a break, but a very, consistent competitor to watch. So, yeah.
Yeah. And he creates moments. He has good battles. He's not completely stomping his weight class, even though he's been successful. Like there have been challenges. Like I think that's the big thing with Jesus. Can we get someone else though? We need someone to challenge Jesus. Or is there anyone who can push his...
Just gain 300 pounds. You'll be good. No, there's nobody.
I would need the cycle of all cycles.
No, there's nobody. I don't know when we'll see somebody because obviously even entering that weight class or entering the open, I guess, is that already vets a lot of people out. So
yeah, I mean, we'll see any challenge to Jesus we're going to see coming a mile off. Like he won't be able to like sneak his way in.
Yeah, exactly.
Finishing off the lightning round, what would your death row meal be?
My death row meal. Either like an omakase sushi dinner or just like a fat ribeye with like blue cheese mashed potatoes.
Oh. You can get both of those. No, this
grilled
death
cheese
row
mashed
meal.
Potatoes?
You get you can have as many courses as what you want. Fuck, I'd love to die after that. Yeah, sign me up for that death row meal. And then the final one. So there's 2 different pathways that I'll let you take for this question. It's just I just don't want the boring answers because what I say to a lot of people, you can go back in time and warn someone about something that's going to happen to stop something from happening, but without any of that like butterfly effect nonsense. Or you can opt for 15 to 20 seconds to go back and chat with yourself as a child, and again just bestow some information or a warning upon yourself. And what would that be?
Go back and stop something from happening, or
because a lot of people like, go back, warn people about Hitler. Because I'm like, my example is going back and warning people about Julius Maddox's unloaded bar. Because I feel like that was like powerlifting's Harambe.
I'd probably opt for going back and talking to my younger self, because if you're stopping something from happening, like let's say I picked something either not related to me or related to me by stopping something from happening. Let's say it's related to me, right? Then what I'm saying is that I am, ultimately not willing to like accept God's providence for my life at this point in time and continue to work forward. Like I'm very happy with where my life is right now. And there's been a lot of stuff that in the moment I was not happy about. Right. So to be at this point and know that there is a path forward that I'm fully trusting in God's providence for that path, I would actively be thwarting that. Whereas if I go back and talk with my younger self, I don't necessarily need to tell him not to do something or, don't let this happen, but I can have a conversation that's imparting some sort of wisdom or being like a question answerer. Like there's a lot that can happen there where I'm not necessarily saying, oh, I want to erase this part of my path.
Yeah. Because even when I think about it, like I think honestly, the biggest thing I want to go back and say to myself, be like, nah, it's all good. Like it's gonna be fine. Like you'll be sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Don't worry.
Yeah. That was a good one. That was actually just shout out to my dad. Like my dad gave some really sick advice to my brother on his wedding day. That was it. I remember my brother talking to me. He was like, yeah, I just asked dad. He was like, could have had a piece of advice you just known throughout your whole life. And dad, that's exactly what he said to Oscar. He's like, there were so many points in my life where I was like really stressed out, felt like the world was ending. But he's like, yeah, here I am, 7 years old. He's like, just fucking wake up the next day, sun rises.
Yep.
Fucking hell. Didn't expect to get that deep on the end of the episode. That's why we have the lightning round.
That was a beautiful ending.
It's tried and it's tested. It seems trivial, but it's really not. Sean, what do you got coming up? Where can people find you? We're months out from the next competition, aren't we?
Yeah, we're a long way from the next. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know when the next time I'll compete is. Just because with all the Article 14 nonsense with
what's that?
So the IPF has a rule basically where if you're a member of the IPF, you cannot participate in any like not WADA sanctioned events. So USAPL falls under that category. So if you're a member of Powerlifting America, you can't compete in a USAPL meet and you can't coach in a USAPL meet. But I have athletes for the remainder of the year who will be doing USAPL meets. So until this year is done, because most of my top lifters want to go Powerlifting America next year. But until this year is done, I'm staying out of Powerlifting America. And then when next year comes around and I need to do my qualifier meet, I'll do that. So if I really get the itch to compete, I might do a USAPL meet sometime this year, but nothing is planned. But in terms of where you can find me, my Instagram is @hamstringpoppy. That's primarily where I'm posting right now. I don't really use any other social media platforms. And if you're interested in learning more about powerlifting technique, programming, coaching, our platform, Powerlifting Now, is a subscription-based service. It's $13 a month, and we have a library of already at this point hundreds of informative videos, all long-form content. And we post every month. So
definitely someone worth checking out, whether it's for the lifting, the coaching, or like I said, the educational content as well. Powerlifting Now, it's like we've had a bunch of their coaches on the show. We should probably have a few more, but yeah, check out Sean's stuff and catch you guys next week.
Take care.